I want next to talk to Marianna Spring, who is the specialist disinformation and social media reporter at the BBC. I've worked with her many times. I know that she puts herself in the line of fire, and that, Marianna, you get a lot of abuse for the investigations that you do. And I just want to mention one of them, your recent BBC Panorama programme called Online Abuse: Why Do You Hate Me? Marianna, let's look at another of these themes for Break the Bias, which is a world free of bias, stereotypes and discrimination. Your thoughts on that?
All of the women I interviewed for the Panorama investigation that you mentioned raised these topics and spoke about the impact that threats, death threats, rape threats, gendered slurs that they've been receiving online for doing their jobs, for being politicians, for being influencers, or just for being doctors and teachers, how that had affected them. And when we talk about the effect of online abuse, we often have this discussion about freedom of speech. And I spend a lot of time holding responsible with my reporting the social media sites for the approach that they take to abuse, threats, and disinformation more broadly. And all of the women I spoke to for Panorama explained how their freedom of speech is absolutely limited by hate and threats that they receive. It deters them from doing their jobs. It puts them off continuing doing their jobs. It stops them being able to work. It leaves them feeling frightened. And it's not just about being a woman. A number of these women received abuse, racist abuse, homophobic abuse, abuse that was a whole range of different protected characteristics about them that left them just feeling incredibly distraught. And I, as you say, I myself have experienced a lot of hate online for the reporting I do, often taking the form of death and rape threats, but everything from gendered slurs to silly little girl and trying to undermine the work I do. And I'm really lucky to have brilliant support at the BBC. So many of these women I interviewed don't have that. They don't have people that understand what's happening to them. They don't feel protected on their social media platforms. And like I say, they feel unable to speak out. So it's absolutely so important to them that they feel as though we're talking about this and they're heard, and that we understand the impact this can have, not just on them, but on all of us and on our society.
Yeah, when you say that, Marianna, it makes me think that Break the Bias is the slogan, the phrase that we're using for this International Women's Day event. But being able to talk about Break the Bias and what it means and what you might be free of if you break the bias matters to those who are at the sharp end.
It does, and I think particularly when it comes to online hate, which women are disproportionately affected by relative to men, and then women who also experience racist and homophobic hate are even more affected by. There's been this stigma about talking about it, that talking about it somehow makes us weak or vulnerable, again kind of playing into tropes about women in general. And that actually I've found it very empowering to be able to report on and investigate this topic and reveal the impact it's having on people, but also to hold accountable all of the institutions and companies that have responsibility here. And as part of the Panorama investigation, we set up an experiment. It was an account called Barry. Barry was based on accounts that have sent me hate. Barry was generally into conspiracy theories, but also some anti-women content on social media. And over the course of 2 weeks, particularly on Facebook and Instagram, he was promoted more and more anti-women hate, including jokes about rape, jokes about harassment, and content from the incel community. And Facebook and Instagram told us, Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, told us that they do put the well-being of their users and female users, that's a priority. They put it over profit. But as this experiment revealed, there's clearly a huge problem online. And if we don't reveal it and we don't speak up about it, people just aren't aware of it, and it continues. And off the back of that investigation, I testified to MPs about the Barry the Troll experiment. We saw how that was then reflected in some of the online safety drafts and draft legislation here in the UK. And I think it's so crucial that we speak up on these issues and aren't afraid to, as journalists, report on them, and as people to speak up if we can, because it clearly does make a difference.
Yeah, I want to be able to speak about solutions as well as challenges. And Marianna, although you're dealing with a lot that's negative, is there anything you can tell us about those who've stepped up? What gives you hope?
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the most important moments of my career so far was the impact that Panorama investigation had, and how many of the women who I interviewed reached out to me, but also women from across the world explaining how they felt so relieved that someone was revealing and exposing what they've been experiencing, that they hoped that it would expose the scale of the problem. And as we've seen in the reaction from both social media sites and politicians here in the UK, but all over the world to that investigation, there absolutely is a willingness to resolve these problems. And I think my job is to investigate and reveal them, and often as a consequence, hopefully that happens. And I think that even over the course of the past 2 years doing my job, a lot of the hate I experience is for covering online conspiracies. But actually, I think that the attitude towards online hate and the saying this actually isn't okay and we don't need to put up with it has changed, and I feel very well supported, and like people understand why it matters and why it's a problem, and it feels like a relief, really similar to those women who get in touch with me, to be able to say, oh wow, it really isn't normal to constantly be called these gendered slurs, and people constantly target me for being a woman online, and so here's what we can do next.